What does it mean to be the Imago Dei, which is Latin for the image of God? Many Christians never ask this question and simply assume they know the meaning of it, or never give it much thought. But the idea is very important for Christian theology and understanding the relationship between God and humans. Of all the created beings mentioned in the Bible, only humans are said to be the image of God. So let's ask the question, what does it mean to be the image of God? How are we different from the rest of creation? Some groups like the Mormons assume a part of it means we physically look like God. But this is irrational since God is beyond space-time and not limited to physical form. The book of John says God is spirit, not a physical being. He can take on the nature of a physical being, but that is not his essence. So it obviously cannot mean we physically look like God. Most Christians take the substantive view, which believes the image of God means we spiritually or psychologically resemble God, that our actual mental ontology matches the nature of God in certain ways. For example, God is a rational being, and He created humans to be rational as well. God is a creative being, so He made humans to be creative as well. God understands right and wrong, so He created humans to understand right and wrong as well. Under this view, God created man differently than He created all other creatures. The image of God is an ontological or biological claim, meaning that to have the Imago Dei means you are rational, creative, and can comprehend morality, or something similar to this. So under this view, if God were to give the Imago Dei to another creature, they would also obtain these features. However, there is a problem with this view. If to be the image of God means you're rational, creative, and understand morality, then we have to ask if Satan is the image of God. Satan and the other angels are rational, creative, and understand right and wrong. So if the substantive view of the Imago Dei was correct, the angels would also have to be the image of God. But the Bible teaches only humans were given the Imago Dei. Angels are never spoken of as the image of God. Only humans are. Plus, as we went over in our video if Christians can believe in evolution or not, some animals display rationality and creativity. Man is exclusive in the amount of intelligence we have over the rest of the species on Earth, but that doesn't mean we are the only rational and creative creatures alive. So since this is the case with angels and certain animals, it can't be the case that man is singled out as the only rational being. On top of that, Scripture doesn't differentiate between man and animals ontologically. Scripture uses the same words when it speaks of God creating man and animals. The Hebrew word for soul is said of both humans and animals, as well as the Hebrew word for spirit. The phrase spirit of life is also used for both animals and humans. The word for flesh is used for both humans and animals as well. It is a recurring theme in Scripture that humans and animals are ontologically the same. Ecclesiastes 3:18-20 goes so far as to say, I said in my heart with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place, all are from the dust, and to the dust all return. So the Bible doesn't indicate we are biologically or ontologically different from animals. But the Bible does say man is singled out as the Imago Dei. What does this mean? How are humans different from the rest of creation, if it is not an ontological or spiritual distinction? Well, many scholars of Genesis note the Imago Dei is not a special creation point. In other words, it has nothing to do with our ontology or biology, but has everything to do with our calling or the purpose given to us by God. The scholar Joshua Moritz has been the most vocal about this and has published several papers and books arguing the Imago Dei is a point of election. In other words, it means humans were called by God to be His representatives or image bearers on earth. The Imago Dei means exactly the same thing it does in the New Testament, when Paul says we are called to conform to the image of His Son. God calls humans into a relationship with Him, has us be the representatives of God to the rest of creation in His name, and has us be His stewards or caretakers of creation. to be the image of God has nothing to do with our material creation or material origin, but when God called us to be His image bearers, and when He first made Himself known to humans so that we could enter into a relationship or a covenant with Him. Joshua Moritz says, "As Abraham was chosen by God from among the nations, so humans are chosen by God from among the multiplicity of life forms to serve as priests of the cosmic temple and to represent God's purposes and will to their fellow organic co-heirs of God's kingdom. Humans are the image of God, not by biological nature or right, but through election from among the animals by divine grace. As human animals by form and nature, we are biological priests by vocation, and as such are called and anointed to be agents in the renewal of God's whole creation, from Adam to Noah and from Abraham to Christ." Horst Preuss says, "Humans were taken into service as the partner of God, a word that probably best and most comprehensively translates the meaning of image and likeness. These terms make no statements about the nature of human beings, but rather intend to describe humanity's function as willed by God. Humans represent God in a prescribed realm and receive for this purpose certain qualities, which do not make them God-like, but rather elevates them to be the partners of God." J. Richard Middleton says, "Careful exegesis of Genesis 1:26-28 does indeed suggest that the Imago Dei refers to human rule, that is, the exercise of power on God's behalf in creation. A royal functional reading of the Imago Dei is essentially confirmed." Again, many biblical scholars of Genesis point this out, and this is far more consistent with how God acts in Scripture. When God wanted to start a family to bless all nations of the world, He did not make one literally out of dust. He called Abraham, who was already existing. When God wanted to elect a nation to represent Him to the rest of the world, He chose Israel to be His image bearer. And in the New Covenant, God elects Christians to be the image of His Son, who is also God, or to be His body. God is one who wants to work with humans, His chosen representatives, to make creation better, which is a reoccurring theme in Scripture. We also see in Scripture the idea that if one breaks their covenant with God as His image bearers, there is an exile from His holy place. Israel was exiled away from the Holy Land, and likewise, when Adam and Eve broke their covenant, they were also exiled. So there is consistency here as well. So like Israel later on, Adam and Eve were chosen to be the first priests of God for all of creation. Scholars note the Garden of Eden functioned as the first temple, the place where the priest and priestess would go to commune with God. When they failed as creation's representatives, all of mankind in creation fell with them, and we were cut off or exiled from perfect communion with God in Eden. This also explains why Paul is always comparing Adam to Jesus. Adam is the priest of mankind who failed, whereas Jesus is the priest for mankind who succeeded. Both are different representatives for humanity. So if the image of God just means the purpose that was given to us by God, or the point when we were elected to be His image bearers, this opens up a far better understanding of Christian doctrine and why Adam is always contrasted with Christ. It also points out that if the Imago Dei just speaks of the time when man was elected by God, that would obviously mean humans were already in existence in order for God to call them to be His image. And that would mean Genesis 1 doesn't speak about the material origin of mankind, but about when humans were first called by God. Adam and Eve are not necessarily seen as the first humans, but the first humans called to be God's image. Thus Genesis 1 would not be a claim about the origin of humanity, and would be compatible with the current scientific views about the biological origin of humanity. But doesn't the Hebrew word bara, used in Genesis 1:27 to speak of man being created, mean to be created from nothing? Young Earth creationists use this argument quite often, but scholar John Walton points out the evidence in Scripture is just not there. The word is used over 50 times in the Old Testament. However, its usage is ambiguous in terms of material creation, and Walton notes that no clear example occurs that demands a material perspective for the verb. In contrast, a large percentage of the context require a functional understanding. In other words, the Hebrew verb bara speaks of something being given a divine function by God, not necessarily speaking of the material creation of something. Take for example Isaiah 65:18, where it says, "I create Jerusalem to be a joy." Obviously God did not create Jerusalem out of nothing. He assigned it the function to be a place of joy. Or Psalm 51, where it says, "Create in me a clean heart." The context shows he isn't asking God to literally create a new material heart, but to give his attitude a new function or purpose. John Walton argues the word is primarily used for God assigning a function to something. And the dictionary of the Old Testament says, the Hebrew verb bara is not necessarily physical manufacturing, as much as assigning roles. This direction is picked up nicely in Genesis 5:2, where God creates people, male and female, that is, with established roles. In all of these cases, something is brought into existence functionally, not materially. Rare would the statement concern the issue of matter. Indeed, the text never uses bara in a context in which materials are mentioned. Instead of suggesting manufacturing of matter out of nothing, as many have inferred in the past, this suggests that manufacture is not the issue. The lexical analysis suggests, instead, that the essence of the word that the text has chosen, bara, concerns bringing heaven and earth into existence by focusing on operation through organization and assigning of roles and functions. So since the Hebrew verb bara is never used to definitively refer to a material creation, although it might at times, it more likely means assigning or giving something a function. And given the context we already discussed in relation to the nature of the Imago Dei as a purpose and not a special creation point, it is more likely the verb in Genesis 1:27 is being used for a divine function or purpose being given to humans. Not that it means humans were materially created at this point. So if the Imago Dei passages in Genesis just mean an election point, then it cannot be speaking of the material origin of humanity. The only thing that happens before this on day 6 of Genesis is the creation of land animals. This was significant to early Jews, as Joshua Moritz points out.
We even find that humans and animals share the same day of creation day, which for early Jews was significant. Early Jews saw the days of Genesis 1 as representative of concentric circles of greater or lesser intimacy with God. And so the land animals belong to the innermost circle of intimacy, having been created on the 6th day together with humans. Humans don't even get their own day of creation. They share it with the land animals.
Let's assume for the sake of time, this creation on day 6 is talking about the material creation of animals. John Walton argues this isn't true, but let's assume for the sake of time that it is. The Hebrew word for create is asa, which is used several times in the Bible to talk about something being made through a process, like with a baby or Noah's Ark. These things are made over time through processes, not instantaneously. The passage also says that God said for the earth to bring forth the animals. So God used the earth to bring about the species of animals that we have. So that would mean this passage can be read as saying that through natural processes, the earth created the variety of animals that we have now. And since we know the Bible teaches there is no ontological or biological difference between man and animals, with places like Ecclesiastes 3:18-20, this creation with the land animals would have to include humans, which later on were divinely appointed to be God's image bearers. So this would logically mean that Genesis is compatible with a multitude of views about the material origin of humanity.